I saw Ethan before I saw the three men closing in around me. That was the first thing I hated about the whole situation. The second was that he had apparently seen me too. The party had spilled out of the rented house and onto the back patio, where half the senior class seemed determined to celebrate surviving another week of final semester deadlines. I had stepped away from the noise for maybe 2 minutes when three guys I vaguely recognized from campus blocked the narrow path back toward the house. It started with a comment about the fellowship. Then another about how people like me always thought we were smarter than everyone else. I could have handled insults. What I didn't like was the way one of them moved closer every time I tried to step around him. Move. He smiled. Relax. His hand closed around my wrist. I pulled back immediately, and then Ethan Cole appeared. He didn't shout. He didn't ask what was happening. He simply crossed the distance between us and stepped directly in front of me, putting himself between me and all three of them like he'd already decided exactly where he belonged. Take your hand off him. The guy released me. Maybe it was Ethan's tone. Maybe it was the fact that Ethan was taller than two of them and looked completely prepared to stand there all night. Whatever changed, the confrontation lost its momentum. One of them muttered something. Ethan didn't move. Eventually, they did. I stared at the back of his shoulders until they disappeared into the crowd. Then Ethan turned around. You okay? The question irritated me more than it should have. I didn't need rescuing. I didn't say you did. You stepped in front of me. Yes. Why? His expression barely changed. That familiar calmness was exactly what made competing with him so infuriating. For 3 years, Ethan had treated every class ranking, presentation, scholarship, and professor's approval like another score between us. We were currently waiting to find out which of us had the advantage in the most important competition yet, the final fellowship selection that could shape everything after graduation. Helping me wasn't part of our usual arrangement. Anyone would have done it, he said. I looked past him toward the house. Dozens of people had been nearby. None of them had. You were across the patio. So you saw it happen before I even realized they were surrounding me. For the first time, something shifted in his face. Small. Almost nothing. But I knew Ethan's expressions better than I wanted to admit. He looked away. Go back inside, Noah. I caught his arm before he could leave, then immediately became aware that I was touching him. His eyes dropped to my hand. I released him. You don't get to do something like that and pretend it meant nothing. His gaze returned to mine. For one strange second, the rivalry between us felt like a language neither of us knew how to speak anymore. Then Ethan stepped back. It meant 3 guys were bothering you, he said. Don't make it complicated. He walked away before I could answer. I stayed where I was, rubbing the wrist one of them had grabbed and watching Ethan disappear into the house. For 3 years, I'd thought I understood exactly why Ethan Cole paid attention to me. That night was the first time I wondered if I'd been wrong. By 9 the next morning, I had almost convinced myself the whole thing had bothered me because Ethan had embarrassed me. Almost. Then I walked into the academic building and found him outside the fellowship coordinator's office, leaning against the wall with a folder tucked under one arm. His eyes went straight to my wrist. Not my face. My wrist. I shoved both hands into my jacket pockets. Good morning to you too. Ethan straightened. Does it hurt? I stopped. What? Your wrist. There was no point pretending I didn't know what he meant. It's sore. That's all. The right one. I stared at him. He had been across the patio when that guy grabbed me. There had been bodies between us, music, bad lighting, people moving everywhere. And somehow Ethan remembered which wrist. Before I could ask how, the coordinator opened the office door and called us inside. The fellowship had already turned our final semester into a competition neither of us could ignore. Now the disturbance at the event had complicated preparations for the final collaborative evaluation. A presentation component needed to be rebuilt quickly, and because Ethan and I were the 2 strongest candidates, we were being assigned to complete it together. I almost laughed. Ethan didn't. You have a problem with that? I asked as we left the office. With working with you? With helping your competition? He gave me the look he usually reserved for questions he considered beneath both of us. If your work drags the presentation down, it affects me too. There he was. That explanation made sense. I should have accepted it. Instead, as we walked down the corridor, I said, "You still haven't explained last night." "I did." "No. You gave me a sentence designed to end the conversation. It worked for several hours." I stopped walking. Ethan took 2 more steps before realizing I wasn't beside him. He turned. "You were watching me." His jaw tightened. "Don't flatter yourself. You knew where I was. You saw them surrounding me. You saw which hand grabbed which wrist." His eyes flicked down again before he could stop himself. That tiny movement gave me more satisfaction than winning any argument should have. "You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Checking." Ethan exhaled slowly. "You said it was sore. And you remembered exactly where." For once, he didn't have an immediate answer. People moved through the hallway around us, but Ethan seemed suddenly interested in anything except looking directly at me. Finally, he said, "I pay attention." "To everyone?" His gaze snapped back to mine. I waited. That familiar competitive edge returned to his expression, but now I could see something underneath it. Something I couldn't name without making the entire situation ridiculous. "We have work to do, Noah." He started toward the library. I followed, partly because the fellowship mattered too much to waste time and partly because I wanted the answer he clearly wasn't going to give me. For years, Ethan had been the person I measured myself against. The person whose grades I checked before anyone else's. The person whose name on a ranking could ruin or improve my entire afternoon. I had always assumed he watched me for the same reason. Competition required tension. That explanation had been perfectly comfortable until last night. Now, walking a few steps behind him, I noticed the way he glanced back once to make sure I was following. And I made myself a quiet promise. If Ethan Cole was paying attention to me for some reason other than winning, I was going to find out what it was. The library gave us a glass-walled study room for 2 hours, which was apparently enough time for Ethan and me to discover that working together was even more irritating than competing against each other. "You're overcomplicating the opening," he said. "You're oversimplifying it. The panel needs the argument before the details. The details establish the argument." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "And this is why your presentations always run long." I looked up from my laptop. "My presentations don't always run long. They do when you're nervous." I stopped typing. Ethan seemed to realize his mistake a second too late. "How would you know when I'm nervous?" "You start reorganizing things that are already organized." I glanced at the 3 neat stacks of papers I'd created beside my laptop. He smiled. I hated that smile, mostly because I nearly smiled back. We returned to work and something unexpected happened. The presentation got better. I was good at building structure quickly. Ethan was annoyingly good at finding the weak points inside it. Every time I thought I'd closed an argument, he found the question the panel might use to break it apart. Every time he pushed too far into details, I pulled us back toward the central point. Neither of us had to slow down for the other. By late afternoon, we'd accomplished more together than I wanted to admit. We carried our notes outside to the courtyard, where I headed automatically toward the coffee kiosk. Ethan spoke before I reached the counter. "Large coffee. No sugar." I turned. He was already holding one out to me. I took it slowly. "Did you just order for me?" "You get the same thing every time. You know what coffee I drink? You've been drinking it for 3 years. That doesn't answer the question." "It literally does." We sat at an outdoor table. I watched him open his folder and suddenly remembered that he always read the evaluation criteria twice before starting anything important. I knew he hated vague instructions. I knew he tapped his pen against his thumb when he thought someone else's argument was weak. I knew exactly what expression appeared on his face when he received a grade he considered unfair. The realization was uncomfortable. Maybe Ethan wasn't the only one who had been paying attention. He looked up. "What?" "Nothing. You do that thing with your mouth when you're stressed." I froze with the coffee halfway to my lips. "What thing?" "Exactly that." I set the cup down. "Okay, this is getting weird." "What is?" "You know my coffee order. You know when I'm nervous. You apparently know what my face does before I do. Ethan's expression became carefully neutral. You study your competition. For 3 years. If they're good enough. The answer sounded like him. Sharp, logical, impossible to argue with. Yesterday I might even have believed it. But yesterday I hadn't watched him step between me and 3 men without hesitation. I leaned forward. So that's all this is? His eyes held mine. What's all what? You paying attention? For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Ethan closed the folder. You really want an explanation? Yes. A faint challenge returned to his face. Then beat me. I laughed once, despite myself. You're impossible. And you're behind on the second section. He stood and started gathering our papers. I should have been annoyed. Instead, I watched him and felt something unfamiliar slip beneath the rivalry. Something warmer, more dangerous, and much harder to dismiss. Because Ethan was right about one thing. Competition required attention. What I couldn't explain anymore was why being noticed by him suddenly felt so different. Or why I knew him well enough to suspect it felt different to him too. By the time we reached the fellowship rehearsal 2 evenings later, Ethan and I had developed a working arrangement neither of us was willing to call an arrangement. I built the structure. He attacked it. I defended it. Then we kept whatever survived. It should have felt exactly like our old rivalry, except now I noticed things I had never allowed myself to notice before. How close he stood when reading over my shoulder. How quickly he looked at me whenever someone challenged my work. How often I could tell what he was about to say from the smallest change in his expression. The coordinator listened to my section without interrupting until I reached the central argument. Then came the criticism. My evidence, he said, wasn't strong enough to support the conclusion as confidently as I'd presented it. If the final panel reached the same conclusion, that weakness could damage my evaluation. I nodded and started writing down the feedback. Ethan spoke. The evidence supports it. I looked at him. The coordinator did too. Ethan opened his folder and calmly pointed to 2 pieces of material we'd reviewed together, explaining how they connected directly to my argument. He wasn't polite about it. He was precise. Worse, he was convincing. The coordinator reconsidered the point, gave me a narrower revision to make, and moved on. I barely heard the next few minutes. Ethan had just defended the strongest section of my presentation, the section he would benefit from seeing weakened. When rehearsal ended, I waited until the coordinator left before turning on him. What was that? Ethan continued packing his papers. Feedback. You defended me. I corrected an incomplete assessment. That's a very Ethan way of saying you defended me. He zipped his bag. I stepped into his path. You could have said nothing. And let you present a weaker version? You're competing against me. His eyes narrowed. I'm aware. Then why do you keep helping me? His jaw shifted. There it was again. That tiny hesitation that had started bothering me more than any answer could. I want to beat you at your best. I stared at him. That might be the stupidest thing you've ever said. That's impressive considering how much you claim I talk. You stepped between me and 3 guys. You remembered which wrist one of them grabbed. You know my coffee order, my stress habits, and apparently every weakness in my presentation. Now you're actively making my fellowship chances better. I'd make anyone's argument better if I had to present beside them. No, you wouldn't. He went still. I moved closer without deciding to. So stop giving me explanations you know I won't believe. Ethan didn't retreat. For once, neither did I. The empty rehearsal room seemed suddenly too quiet. We were standing close enough that I could see the tension in his mouth. Close enough that lowering my voice felt more natural than stepping away. What do you want me to say? He asked. The truth. His gaze dropped briefly to my mouth. It happened so quickly I could have pretended I imagined it. I didn't. Something sharp and warm moved through me. Ethan looked back into my eyes, and whatever argument I'd been preparing disappeared. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he stepped away first. You should fix that section before tomorrow. The distance between us returned, but the old certainty didn't. I watched him leave the room with his bag over one shoulder. 3 years of competition had taught me that Ethan Cole hated giving away an advantage. Yet twice in less than a week, he'd done exactly that for me. And for the first time, the question wasn't whether Ethan wanted to beat me. It was what he wanted badly enough to risk losing. The next night, the classroom was almost empty when Ethan found the mistake. We had been working through the presentation one final time, both of us tired enough that our usual arguments had become shorter and quieter. I was halfway through checking the closing section when Ethan reached across the table and stopped me from changing slides. Go back. To what? The previous one. I did. He leaned toward my laptop, reading the supporting material again. Then he swore under his breath. What? This reference doesn't support the way you've framed the conclusion. My stomach tightened. It did yesterday. We changed the argument after rehearsal. I read it again. He was right. The revision I'd made after the coordinator's criticism had created a gap somewhere else. It wasn't catastrophic, but if the panel noticed it, the strongest part of my presentation would suddenly look careless. I can rebuild it. You don't have enough time. That's encouraging. Ethan pulled his chair closer. We do if we split it. I looked at the notes spread beside his laptop. You still have your own section to finish. I know. Then finish it. Noah. Ethan. This is exactly what I was talking about yesterday. He ignored me and started searching through our materials. For the next hour, he helped me reconstruct the argument. Not casually. Not by pointing me toward the answer and returning to his own work. He stayed until every connection held. Only when I leaned back and realized the problem was fixed did I notice his own preparation notes sitting untouched at the other end of the table. I looked at the clock, then at him. You just lost an hour. I can count. You needed that time. So did you. Something in me snapped. I closed my laptop. Why? Ethan kept looking at his notes. Don't. Don't what? Give me another answer about wanting to beat me at my best. His expression hardened. I wasn't going to. Good. Then tell me why. He stood and gathered several papers into a stack that didn't need gathering. I watched his hands. You keep doing this, I said. Every time helping me costs you something, you do it anyway. We're working together. This isn't about the presentation. Noah, you stepped between me and those guys before I even knew I needed help. You knew which wrist they grabbed. You know what I drink, when I'm stressed, how I present, when I'm about to argue with someone. That last one isn't difficult. Stop hiding behind jokes. His hands went still. The room felt smaller than it had a minute earlier. I stood. Why do you always notice when something happens to me? Ethan looked at me then. Really looked. The competitive expression was gone. So was the careful indifference he'd been using since the party. For the first time in 3 years, I saw something in his face that frightened me precisely because I wanted it to be there. You want the truth? He asked quietly. Yes. He swallowed. You affect me. I didn't move. He continued before I could speak. More than you should. More than anyone else does. My pulse kicked hard. How long? His eyes shifted away. That's not a question I'm answering tonight. Why not? Because I'm already saying more than I planned to. It wasn't enough. But it was far more than he'd ever given me. I stepped closer. This time, Ethan didn't move away. My right hand rested against the edge of the table between us. His gaze dropped to it, and for 1 second I thought he was remembering the party. Then his fingers touched my wrist. Not gripping, not checking for soreness, just touching. His thumb rested lightly against the inside of my wrist, deliberate enough that neither of us could pretend it was accidental. I forgot whatever I had intended to say. Ethan's eyes lifted to mine. The distance between us could have disappeared with one movement. Neither of us made it. After several seconds, his hand fell away. I felt the absence immediately. We should finish, he said. His voice wasn't steady. Neither was mine when I answered. Yeah. But we both knew something had already finished. Whatever Ethan and I had been before that classroom, we couldn't go back to calling it simple rivalry. He had finally answered one question. I mattered to him. Now a much more dangerous one had taken its place. If I had mattered for longer than I knew, what exactly had Ethan Cole been trying to hide behind 3 years of wanting to beat me? For the next several days, Ethan and I became very good at not discussing what had happened in the classroom. We still worked together. We still argued when one of us thought the other was wrong. But the old pleasure we had taken in provoking each other was gone. When I challenged him now, Ethan sometimes stopped before firing back, as if he had to decide whether the argument belonged to the rivalry we'd had or whatever had replaced it. I hated how much I noticed. I hated even more that I understood why. You affect me. The words followed me everywhere. So did the memory of his fingers against my wrist. During our next fellowship review, Ethan was given access to a weakness in my section that he could have used to strengthen his own position. A month earlier, I would have expected him to exploit it before I'd even finished recognizing the opportunity. He didn't. Afterward, I caught him. Outside the academic building. You could have used that. He kept walking. Used what? You know exactly what. It wouldn't have improved the final presentation. It would have improved your chances. That stopped him. I stepped in front of him. You don't get to pretend we're still doing this the old way. His expression tightened. I'm not pretending anything. Then compete with me. He stared at me. The absurdity of my own demand hit me immediately. For 3 years, I'd wanted nothing more than to beat Ethan Cole. Now I was angry because he was making it too easy. You want me to hurt your chances just so things can feel normal again? He asked. No. I want you to explain why you can't. His gaze shifted away, and suddenly I began remembering. Ethan showing up early whenever I was presenting. Ethan knowing my scores before I told anyone. Ethan becoming unbearable whenever I stopped reacting to him. The expression on his face when I'd mentioned dates over the years, a reaction I'd always interpreted as contempt for my distractions. Every memory changed slightly when I looked at it through what he'd admitted in that classroom. How long? I asked again. He knew exactly what I meant. Noah, how long have I affected you? His silence answered enough to make my chest tighten. I laughed once, but there was nothing funny in it. God, Ethan. He looked at me then, and I could see the instinct to retreat behind some competitive remark. He didn't use it. That almost made things worse. The fellowship deadline was only days away now. The final decision wouldn't just determine which of us had won. The opportunity attached to it could take one of us away after graduation. For years, that had been the point. Win, leave, become whatever came next. I had never imagined Ethan as part of that equation. Now I couldn't stop imagining the possibility that he wouldn't be. We can't go back, I said. His face went still. No, it was the first thing we'd agreed on without arguing. But agreement wasn't resolution. Whatever had existed between us before was gone. And Ethan still wouldn't tell me what had been underneath it. He walked beside me toward the next fellowship session. Close enough that our shoulders nearly touched but never did. For once, neither of us tried to get ahead. And I realized the competition I'd spent 3 years trying to win no longer frightened me nearly as much as what winning might require me to leave behind. The fellowship result arrived late Thursday afternoon. I read the message twice before I understood what it meant. I had won. The opportunity one had spent 3 years imagining was suddenly real, including the part one had always treated as an uncomplicated reward. After graduation, I would leave. I found Ethan outside the academic building. One look at my face and he knew. You got it. I waited for the reaction I understood. Annoyance. A challenge. Some comment about finally getting lucky. Instead, Ethan smiled. Not the sharp smile he used when he thought he could beat me. Something quieter. Congratulations, Noah. That hurt more than losing to him ever had. That's it. His smile disappeared. What do you want me to say? I don't know. Something. You earned it. And I'm leaving. His eyes held mine for a second. I know. There was no argument. No demand that I reconsider. No sign that the man who had spent years fighting for every inch between us intended to fight for this. Over the next few minutes, he talked about finishing the remaining fellowship requirements as if we were discussing anyone else's future. I barely listened. Finally, I said, You're doing it again. Doing what? deciding what this means without telling me. His jaw tightened. You got what you wanted. That isn't an answer. It should be. I stepped closer. No. For 3 years, you wouldn't let me walk into a classroom without turning it into a competition. You noticed everything I did. You remembered everything. Then you told me I affect you more than anyone else. And now I'm leaving and suddenly you're fine letting me disappear. His face changed. I'm not fine. Then why are you acting like this? Because I'm not asking you to give that up for me. I didn't say I would. Then what do you want? The truth. He looked away. I didn't let him escape this time. Why me, Ethan? Silence stretched between us. Then he said, because I liked you. My breath caught. He laughed bitterly. Before I knew what to do with it. Before we were even really rivals. I said nothing. It was easier when you were competition. I could find out your scores because I wanted to beat you. I could show up when you presented because I needed to know what you were doing. I could annoy you until you looked at me because that was better than wondering whether you'd look at me otherwise. Every memory I'd been rearranging for days suddenly locked into place. The dates, I said. His mouth tightened. Yeah. You were jealous. I was an idiot. You were definitely an idiot. That almost made him smile. Almost. Then I understood the party. You stepped between me and those guys because one of them put his hands on you. His voice sharpened immediately. And for about 30 seconds, I forgot I was supposed to act like you were just someone I wanted to beat. There it was. The answer I'd been chasing since that night. It should have made everything easier. Instead, the fellowship offer sat between us like a countdown. So what now? I asked. Ethan looked at me for a long moment. Now you go. The words landed harder than I expected. You finally tell me all of that. And your solution is for me to leave? My solution is that you don't throw away something you've worked for because I took 3 years to admit why I couldn't stop paying attention to you. He stepped back. For once, I didn't follow. I had wanted the truth. Now I had it. Ethan hadn't hated me. He had built an entire rivalry around wanting me. And just when I finally understood what we'd been to each other, he was prepared to let me win the one thing that could take me away from him. The final fellowship session should have felt like victory. Instead, I spent most of it watching Ethan. The panel moved through the last evaluation points, including the work we'd completed together. I knew what came next because Ethan knew it too. One weakness in my final contribution remained open to challenge. Nothing dishonest. Nothing cruel. If Ethan pointed it out, he would be doing exactly what we'd done to each other for 3 years. He would also improve his own standing. The panel asked whether either of us wanted to clarify the record. I looked at Ethan. He looked at me. For 1 second, I saw the rival I knew, the man who could identify an advantage before anyone else realized one existed. Then Ethan spoke. But he didn't expose the weakness. He credited me. He explained that the strongest part of our final work had come from the structure I'd developed, including revisions that had made his own contribution more effective. He could have stayed silent. Instead, in front of the people evaluating us, Ethan made my work harder to dismiss. I stared at him. He never looked away. By the time we stepped outside, I was furious. Ethan made it halfway down the corridor before I said his name. He stopped. What was that? His expression was almost amused. You really need to find a new question. You had an opening. I know. You could have used it. I know. And you didn't. No, I walked toward him. Why? This time he didn't hide. Because I don't want to win that way. That's not the whole answer. No, he held my gaze. It isn't. The hallway suddenly felt as quiet as that classroom had when he touched my wrist. Ethan exhaled. I spent 3 years telling myself beating you was the reason I kept looking for you. Maybe I believed it sometimes. But I'm done choosing the competition because it's easier than choosing you. My anger disappeared so quickly it left me almost dizzy. You don't get to make that choice alone. His brow furrowed. You told me to go, I said. Because you should. You decided that accepting the fellowship means losing whatever this is. I won't ask you to stay. I know. Then what are we arguing about? You assuming staying is the only way I could choose you. He stared at me. I stepped closer. I can take the fellowship. Yes. I can leave after graduation. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. And I can still want you. That stopped everything. For once, Ethan Cole had absolutely nothing to say. So I kissed him. There was no hesitation once our mouths met. His hand came up, then stopped near my face as if even now he was waiting for permission. I leaned into it. His palm settled against my cheek. The kiss was nothing like our arguments. There was no advantage to find, no point to score, no reason for either of us to refuse to give ground. When we finally separated, Ethan looked stunned. I couldn't help smiling. I've wanted to see you lose an argument for years. That was unfair. You'll survive. His thumb moved once against my cheek before his hand dropped. Then his expression turned serious. Noah, the distance will be difficult. And graduation is still happening. And you still want to do this? I thought about the party, the library, the classroom. 3 years of mistaking attention for hostility because rivalry had been easier for both of us to understand. Yes, he searched my face. This isn't another competition, I said. Good. It's not an experiment either. Also good. And we're not going to kiss once and spend the next month pretending it was some graduation crisis. That finally brought back his familiar smile. So what are you proposing? A date. With me. Don't ruin it. He laughed softly. I hadn't realized until then how rarely I'd heard him laugh without an edge of competition underneath it. A real date, I said. Then another one if you manage not to be unbearable. And after you leave? We figure it out. Ethan was quiet. Then he nodded. Not because the future had become simple. Because, finally, we were choosing the complicated version on purpose. For years, Ethan had measured himself against me. That evening, when he had one last clean opportunity to put himself ahead, he let it go. Not so I could win. So we could stop treating winning as the only reason we mattered to each other. Graduation arrived before either of us was ready for it. The fellowship hadn't changed. I was still leaving exactly as planned. Ethan never asked me to reconsider, and I never offered to. That mattered. A few weeks earlier, I might have thought choosing someone required giving something up. Ethan had already shown me the opposite. His choice had meant refusing to turn my weakness into his advantage. Mine meant refusing to treat distance as proof that whatever existed between us couldn't survive. On the morning I was preparing to leave, Ethan helped me carry the last of my things. You know, I said, you're being suspiciously useful. He glanced at me. I'm trying something new. Not competing with me? Don't get carried away. I smiled. There he was. The difference was that I no longer needed the rivalry to explain why he was there. When everything was ready, we stood together for a moment. Neither of us pretending the next part would be easy. There would be distance. There would be schedules. There would probably be arguments because neither Ethan nor I had suddenly become reasonable people. But there would also be another date. And another after that. A relationship we had chosen before knowing exactly how to make it work. I thought about the party again. 3 men closing around me. A hand around my wrist. Then Ethan crossing the patio without hesitation and putting himself between me and them. At the time, I had stared at his back and demanded to know why. Now I knew. But I also understood something the answer hadn't given me. I didn't want to spend our future standing behind him. So when Ethan stepped forward beside me, I moved too. Not behind him. Beside him. He noticed. Of course he did. Ethan noticed everything about me. He turned his head and gave me that familiar look. The one that had challenged me across classrooms, rankings, presentations, and 3 ridiculous years of pretending competition was the only thing keeping us in each other's lives. What? I asked. Nothing. You're terrible at nothing. His mouth curved. You planning to argue with me before you leave? I was thinking I'd save it for our next date. Think you can wait that long? I looked at him, at my rival, my first real choice after years of treating him like an obstacle. Try me. His smile widened. Some things between us hadn't disappeared. They had simply stopped meaning what they used to, and when we finally walked forward, neither of us was ahead.